feeling when you're watching something and the frame just feels considered? Like you can't really explain what it is, but everything just feels like it belongs together. The colors, the mood, it all feels intentional. And then you go out and shoot and somehow things just don't click. They don't seem as cinematic, they don't flow as well together. Even if the location is good and the lighting is great, there's still a gap, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. But the more that I've shot over the years and the more that I grade, I've kind of figured out that this all comes down to color. Not just what colors you're using, but the relationship between them. And there's one principle I keep coming back to that I think basically explains all of it. All right, so I think color in filmmaking is one of those things where you can either overcomplicate it or undercomplicate it. A lot of people treat it as a purely technical thing, really getting into the weeds about color temperature, white balance, all that sort of stuff. And then there's other people who kind of just vibe through it and then hope that the grade later will fix everything. And I've done both of those things. For a long time, I relied heavily on my Davinci Resolve color grading workflow and just kind of using it as a crutch to lean on later in post-production. I thought that I could make my clips feel cinematic just purely through the color grade. And while that can get you pretty far, there's kind of a ceiling to this. There's only so much that the grade can do. And that's because color isn't just a technical decision, it's a design decision. Every time you point your camera at a scene, you're making a color decision, whether you like it or not. The real question is whether or not you're making this decision intentionally or you just kind of letting it happen to chance. All right, so the big rule in color theory is the 60-30-10 rule. The 60-30-10 rule is just that, a breakup in how much each color is within your scene. And although it sounds simple, there's a pretty deep formula to it. All right, so let's break this down. First off, the 60 and the 60-30-10. The 60 is your dominant color in your scene. It basically sets the entire emotional tone of the scene. Your brain reads it before you've consciously processed anything else in the frame. It's the feeling before the thought, and it's the reason why a frame can feel warm and nostalgic or cold and unsettling before you've even registered what's in the shot. Then there's the 30, which is your secondary color. Its whole job is to support the dominant color without overpowering it. It's there to give the frame depth, to give it dimension, and without it, things can start to really feel flat, like everything is sitting on the same visual plane and there's nothing to really move through. But it's not there just to steal attention, it's there to just make the dominant color feel more real. And the last part is the 10. The 10 is my personal favorite, and it's the accent color. The accent color is the pop in the frame, and that's the element that tells your eyes where to look. And the reason it works is because it's pretty small. If it were everywhere, it would just become part of the frame, but when it's in one place, one specific element, one small detail, it gives the whole thing a sense of intention. Your eye finds it, and the frame just feels like someone made a decision. Now, this is a visual color theory concept, so the easiest way to talk about this is to show you exactly what I'm talking about. A great example of this is a show that I grew up really liking, and it's called Batman the Animated Series, the show from the early 90s. So this show is really interesting because they made a choice in production that I think about a lot. Every other animated show at the time was painted, physically painted, on white paper. That was just the industry standard. But the team behind Batman made this one decision to paint all the backgrounds on black paper instead, which sounds pretty small, but it basically changed the whole mood of the production. That's because the dominant color, that darkness, that mood, was literally baked into the physical materials before a single other color was even added. The black wasn't something they achieved in post, it was the starting point, and everything else was built on top of that. They even had a name for it. They called it Dark Deco. And now when you watch the show, you can really feel it. You can feel the weight of the dominant color before anything else registers. The secondary colors, all those deep blues and purples of Gotham, they support it without fighting it. And then the accent colors, the reds, the yellows, Batman's logo, they tell you exactly where to look in the frame. The whole thing is just a masterclass in color hierarchy, and they did this from the very beginning. That's the whole point. They didn't just do this in post. And the reason why the 60-30-10 rule works, and this is kind of what helped everything click for me, is that your brain needs hierarchy when you look at a frame. Your eyes and your brain need help to enter and move through and eventually end up landing on a certain section of your frame. And if your frame is chaotic and all other colors are competing against each other, it's really difficult for your viewer to know where to focus on and for things to really feel visually appealing. And if you start to look at frames that really work well and have visual harmony, you notice that oftentimes it's not really about the exposure or the specific grade or the location. It really comes down oftentimes to this 60-30-10 color hierarchy. Your eyes know where to go, and that's what gives a frame that intentionality or that cinematic look. Before we continue to talk about color, let me take a quick second to thank the sponsor of today's video, Higgsfield.
Higgsfield is an all-in-one platform for creators, and they recently introduced the new Cinema Studio 2.5. Cinema Studio 2.5 allows creators full control over your frame. When you're talking about color theory, this becomes extremely important, being able to decide which areas of your scene have those primary, secondary, and accent colors. The workflow is really easy. All you need to do is set your character and your location. Then you can determine your camera sensor, lens, focal length, aperture, and work from there to prompt your scene. Once you've got those set, you can go ahead and select your camera movements. They've got a wide variety of traditional movements that you can select from. It's really amazing to see the level of detailed control you can have over your scene, all in a single workspace. This is super useful for film pre-visualization, where you want to establish shot sequences and establish a look before committing to a physical production. If you want to try out Cinema Studio 2.5 or any of the latest tools from Higgsfield, make sure to click the link down in the description below. There's always a really interesting update almost every single week, and it's really fun to keep up to date with the latest tools.
And thanks again, Higgsfield, for sponsoring today's video. Okay, so the 60-30-10 rule is great, but how do you go about implementing this into your filmmaking or even your photography or your design work or any other creative process? Now, I like to think that the 60-30-10 rule basically happens a lot in the production and pre-production process, and you don't want to rely on it too heavily in the post-production. Anytime in the pre-production process when I can make a decision to select basically an accent color or try to get the environment and the other subject within your frames two-tone or roughly two different tones, those are intentional decisions that I try to make in the pre-production process to make my life later when I'm filming things a lot easier. When you're controlling all the variables on your shoot, this can be kind of like an art direction decision where you decide perhaps the environment, base color, and then you work your way into that secondary color, and then you just choose an accent color. A lot of times when I'm filming myself or I'm filming a subject or someone that I know, or I've got like a shoot out and about and I don't have particular control over all the variables, I like to choose the accent color and work around that. Sometimes that can be something as simple as perhaps my hat color. I like to wear bright hats sometimes. Oftentimes that can be like a shirt color if you're filming people. More often than not, the 60 primary and the secondary 30 can kind of feel harmonious. They live together in harmony and they don't really compete too much, but the accent color is something that might not be typically found in that particular scene. It's just something that stands out. If you can have control over the accent color, at least, that makes it easier to position within your frame, and it just kind of helps make that harmony a lot easier later. Now, in pre-production and production, it's very key to keep the 60-30-10 rule in mind. And oftentimes this isn't like exactly 60%, exactly 30%, exactly 10%. It's just a rough guideline to follow, and it'll help you kind of determine how much of each color you want to try and fit into your frame. Later on in the post-production is where you want to get creative and fine-tune these colors to help adjust them and really highlight the accent color later. And I just say this because a lot of times you don't want to over rely on the post-production side. You want to try and get it right in the pre-production and the production when you're out filming, so that later in the post-production, in the color grading process, it just makes it easier to highlight perhaps the accent color or get the dominant and the secondary colors a little bit more fine-tuned and harmonious. Briefly, I want to talk about a tool that I use in DaVinci Resolve to help accentuate that 10%, that accent color, and also work with your primary and secondary colors. You can do this exact same process in Premiere Pro, but I just use DaVinci a lot of time for my color grading, so let me talk about this tool. All right, so quickly, I've just got a scene set up here in DaVinci, and when you want to highlight a specific color, there are two different tools that you can use. The first is this thing right here called the Color Slice tool. I've talked about this in the past, where you can just kind of select a color and then change the hue. So for instance, right here, I can change the hues of yellow specifically, but oftentimes colors don't necessarily sit just in one of these brackets really nicely, and there's a lot of spillage, for example. In those situations, the Color Slice tool might not be the best tool for this particular use case, and in those cases, I like to use this tool, which is called the Color Warper. The Color Warper or the Chroma Warp is really easy. All you need to do is just hover over a specific section of your scene that you like to change. So for instance, in this scene, the 10% I would say is probably Enzo's pink, which kind of overlaps with this purple. But in this overall scene, I'd say the majority, the main color is this darker color, this darker purple / almost gray. The accent color would be kind of this yellow or even maybe a blue. But the 10% is pretty clear that the 10% would be this pink. And if I wanted to change this hue or the amount of it or really fine tune it, using the Color Warper or the Chroma Warp, just hover over the pink. When you click on the pink, you'll notice that there's a red dot right here, and that's the section of your image that you've selected. And now when you click and drag, you'll notice that you can either go right or left or go towards a different subsection of your rainbow here, and then you can go and highlight a color differently or really accentuate it. For example, like this, where I move it more towards the pink. You can really quickly destroy your image doing this, but if you just want to kind of highlight or change the hue, let's say, of your accent colors, this is a really easy way to only sort of adjust that one specific color. And honestly, the color warper tool is just a great way to help accentuate specific colors. You can change other colors. Obviously, if you want to change, let's say this blue, I can go ahead and click and drag this down or up. You can always go ahead and also add at different points to make your overall selection smaller or larger. If you're just starting out in Davinci, I think the easiest way to think about this is just using this eyedropper. You can click and drag specific colors and change their hues and change their amounts. And this is a great tool to use, especially when you're thinking about the 60-30-10 rule. So yeah, it's a 60-30-10 rule. And it's something that I keep in mind every time that I'm going out to frame something, or I just try to keep it in the back of my mind. It's not an exact science. It's not always 60%, always 30%, always 10%. It's just a general hierarchy to think about as you go ahead and frame your things and be really intentional with your scenes. Once you start seeing it, you'll start to notice it everywhere in your favorite films, in great posters, great paintings. You'll start to see it all over the place, and you'll start to think about, dang, is this really something that everybody thinks about? But oftentimes, once you get that guiding principle in your brain, it starts to become subconscious and second nature. If you have any questions on anything I covered today, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. And if you enjoy my specific color grade, my LUTs, my sound design, any of that, all of my presets will be linked down in the description below in my shop, and it's a huge help to the channel. And if you made it this far, you're a real one. Leave the word Batman so I know you made it to the very end. As always, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.